someone in the cohort said that they had closed on a home due to Scott's relationships. In other words, the deal was closed even though the cohort member didn't make highest offer. I wonder if Scott can share anything. Scott, I think we know who Kanaya is referring to. Can you tell us a little bit of a story? If I recall that you helped them find a condo, and but they weren't the highest bidder, but they got the house anyway. How did that work? And why is it important? This really underscores why the relationships mean everything. Go, Scott.
Yeah, so I would more put it this way. I mean, I educate the clients just like we're doing here. It's a very honest conversation and a strategic plan, and we get prepared and we get ready for being able to put in offers. And I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I do networking events and things like that to build those relationships with other realtors within the community. And so I have respect in the community. It's not necessarily about me and my relationship. We obviously have to be competitive in price and terms and things like that, but that's a part of that education and that planning process. So when we submitted the offer, I had the conversation with the other agent that I'd done a deal with 6 months ago, and we both have a high respect for each other and how we conduct our business and carry ourselves and things such as that. And the lender that I was working with on this deal, he's worked with her as well for almost 20 years. So just that combination, the sellers wanted to sell. There were 6 sellers, and we weren't the highest price, and we didn't have the biggest down payment, and we didn't have the biggest appraisal clause, but they chose us because of the relationships that he knew I had prepared my client, is essentially what it got to. So he knew that my client was making a sound decision when putting in that offer, so they were comfortable being able to accept that contract.
So, I want to just kind of I'll dig a little bit into that, Scott, because here's what I'm hearing, right? What I'm hearing is that, okay, it wasn't financially on paper, it wasn't the best, it wasn't the highest offer, et cetera, but you got the deal anyway. And it wasn't because of your striking good looks that you got the deal, although you do have striking good looks, especially when you wear those cool sunglasses. But to me, it sounds like because of the relationships, because of the trust of this network, the seller inevitably must have felt that this was the best deal for them to take, despite the fact that it may not have been the highest deal or whatever. This was the best deal for them net-wise, in terms of pain, in terms of ease of transaction, ease of close, all those things all added up to this was the best deal. It's not just about the money. There's a lot of other things, and those other things need relationships to come out. That's kind of what I'm catching.
Yeah, exactly. The listing agent went to bat for us is what it came down to, and it was because of all that, because of the experience and things.
Now, we kind of touched on this topic last week a little bit at our last show when we talked about a sort of a survival guide to the current market. Heidi was not there. So I kind of wanted Heidi, I want to ask you a question, is that, one of the things that we brought up at the last show was that, and Scott just kind of re-illustrated that, the importance of relationships and why you really kind of want to work with somebody who's got a good network and kind of built up. I hate to I don't want to put you on the spot, Heidi, but you're pretty good about this kind of stuff. Do you have a story? Can you bring us give us a story, Heidi, of a recent transaction that you closed, just to give us some context in terms of, look, it's not just based on price alone. There's more things that go into that, and you can win you can buy a home with a good network of relationships. It doesn't have to be the highest bid all the time. Can you give us a story that, from your own personal experience, of something that you know about that illustrates that idea?
Well, I think what I can share is kind of why that is too, because your first thought might be, well, why wouldn't the seller just want the highest price? But for the seller, there's also an added cost in a transaction when they pick the wrong offer, and then that buyer is difficult to deal with, or that buyer cancels, and then they go to another buyer, and then that buyer cancels, and then people start to think something's wrong with the property. And I've definitely had that happen. I've experienced this on Maui where I feel like my buyer's offer was selected because they knew that I was educating the buyer about the property and had experience selling at this property. Especially with oceanfront properties and vacation rentals. Sometimes people are looking online, they're not really familiar with what they're buying, and then they get in contract and cancel. And that can cost the seller time and money too. So, that's why it is really important from a seller standpoint to look at not only the price and terms, but how educated are these people about the property? How likely is this transaction going to close? Because that ultimately benefits the seller in the end. So, I mean, I think that's why it's really important.
Actually, something that you just brought up, Heidi, maybe made me realize something that Dylan has mentioned several times, which is that the Hawaii, the standard contract for real estate in Hawaii significantly favors the buyer. The buyer can basically kind of back out, kind of anywhere along the way. So I can definitely see huge value. This kind of really ties it in for me now. I just got my big aha moment here that, knowing if the seller knows the buyer and the buyer's agent, and they know that the buyer's agent has educated the buyer, which means that their chance of backing out of the transaction is low. That's got more value than just the price, because you could always back out. But if you're working on the other side and it's going to be solid, it's a solid offer, you're not going to back out on it. That kind of really changes everything. Dylan, is there anything you want to add to that to this conversation?
Yeah, a couple of things. One. I think it was a week ago, my brother wrote an offer on a house that had 10 offers and got the offer accepted, mainly based on writing a good offer, but also having a relationship with that listing agent. Because in a multiple offer situation for a seller, it's an overwhelming situation, right? You got 10, 14-page offers to look at with all of these different terms. They're in the most cases, they're going to trust their listing agent, right? And they hired that person to help them and trust their advice. And all things being equal, they're going to rely on that person's advice to tell them which offer is the best one, because they've looked at them and compared them. And so it doesn't always come down to price. And even if it does, sometimes when you have a good relationship with the listing agent, that listing agent will come back to you if they want to work with you instead of somebody else and say, hey, if you guys will increase your price by 10,000, we'll go with you, and then you can go back to your buyer and say, hey, if it's a $900,000 house, I mean, 10 grand is not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, right? If you really want that house, and they might give you a tip on what you got to do to modify your offer to get selected. So those are the kind of things that can make those small differences when you're in a really crowded, busy, crazy multiple offer situation. And a stat that illustrates this, right, is this just came out. 91% of real estate commissions are collected by the top 50% of realtors. Right, so the bottom 50% of realtors are fighting over 9% of the real estate commissions, and so what that means is that when you're in that bottom 50%, nobody knows who you are or what you do, or even if you do it full time, because there's a lot of people that have a license that may do 1 or 2 deals a year. So the reality is a name on the bottom of your contract of who your realtor is matters. I mean, it's one of the many things in the contract that matters. But when you're somebody that the other agent on the other side knows, likes, and trusts, and knows it'll do your job, right? That you don't have another full-time job and you're not going to answer the phone and do the inspections and meet the deadlines and all the things that got to happen through the process, that stuff makes a difference. So absolutely, the relationships can be a determining factor.
Great story. So Kanaya, we did an extended discussion for you on that one. I think it was a great question, Kanaya, that you had, and I appreciate your response here on the answer.